Good morning and welcome to the State of Memphis Housing Summit 2020. My name is Mari Albertson and I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Housing and Community Development. And on behalf of Mayor Strickland, Director Young, and the entire team that helped put this event together, we are so excited to have your participation today. We're convening today because it's critical for us as a city to understand the impact of housing stability and affordability in our community. We must advocate for the type of development and programming needed in Memphis in order to enable people to improve their circumstances in their lives. We have paired national and local housing leaders who will participate in discussions around a variety of housing-related topics and lead us in conversations around these issues. We hope that the information presented today starts a broader dialogue around housing and continues the conversation going forward. To do this, it's important that we start at the same baseline, equipped with the same facts, so that we can effectively consider the changes that we want to see as a community. To this end, HCD and our partners have developed the State of Memphis Housing Report to be data-driven in our approach to develop housing strategies and to establish a credible source of facts related to housing and neighborhood conditions. We've already begun to use this data to develop a housing response around COVID-19, recognizing the need to expand housing stability in our community, especially around the areas of homelessness and evictions. Going forward, we'll continue to use this data to establish how we can expand affordable housing supply in Memphis and prevent further loss due to disinvestment. So I am pleased to now introduce our research partner, Austin Harrison, who will share key insights from the report and also how we can use the data to think about comprehensive housing solutions for the City of Memphis. So I thank you again for your participation today, and I really hope that you enjoy a productive day. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director Albertson and the entire City of Memphis team. I'm excited to get to kick things off here today. And as Deputy Director Albertson mentioned, the goal of this report is really to just present the objective facts and allow us to have this common baseline to frame today's discussion. And what we really did as we were beginning to grapple with the impacts of COVID-19 and the impacts that pandemic has on our housing market and on our neighborhoods, we wanted to look back to the last housing crisis that Memphis faced and grew out of stronger. So we went back to 2008 and we used the Great Recession of 2008, the impacts that occurred there, and how Memphis especially came back and rebounded from those impacts, and used that as a framework to look through the lens into COVID-19 and to see how we could begin to assemble the facts in our neighborhood, assemble the data, and use that to propel necessary conversations throughout our community. So to do this, we divided the report up to 5 parts. I'm just briefly going to go through it. The full report is accessible at memphishcd.org. And at the top of the link, we'll share that as well with everyone. But just as a brief synopsis to tee up a conversation with housing directors from across the country in majority Black cities, I'll briefly go through the report here. So we start by introducing the context for this. What do we already know about the impact this pandemic is having on our housing market? And additionally, we start by looking at what just 20% non-payment of rent and mortgage would do to our community. And we see that just in 1 month, that would have almost a $70 million direct impact. And then if we extend that over 3 months. So again, seeing that the economic repercussions of non-payment of housing, what that could mean for our neighborhood. And then to continue that, we look specifically using a COVID neighborhood vulnerability index that we developed at Innovate Memphis. We look specifically at what neighborhoods are being impacted the most. And we see that these areas are really having the highest job loss, low income job loss, having the highest risk of housing instability with either foreclosure or eviction. And we use that to propel into using, contextualizing this, what the neighborhood trends have been in the Memphis area over the past few decades. Because what we are experiencing today in our communities is not in isolation. It is, an advent and a product of our growth as a city. And this is the case in many cities across America. And so for us to better understand how COVID was impacting our neighborhoods, we wanted to take a look back. And so we start going all the way back to 1970, and we see how Memphis has changed over the last few decades, especially racially and demographically. And we show that in 1970, many of the working class neighborhoods, such as Fraser, such as Whitehaven, as you see on the map, they were experiencing they were largely predominantly white communities in 1970. And we see the urban core neighborhoods were predominantly Black. And then as we look forward, 3 decades later, almost 40 years later, in 2017, we see a number of changes in our racial and ethnic makeup in this city. Now, many of the neighborhoods that were predominantly white in 1970 have now shifted to be predominantly Black. We also see in the Nutbush Heights area, Berclair area, we see a growth of a Hispanic population. That's one of the fastest growing demographic groups in our city. Same is the case in the Southeast Memphis area. And so really this change demographically was also occurring alongside a change in population and land growth. So as a lot of Memphians know, as we continued to grow our city size, population stayed fairly stagnant, and this impacted our neighborhoods already. So before we even get to 2000, as early as the 80s and 90s, we were seeing significant disinvestment in historic urban core neighborhoods that was already leading to a high amount of vacancy in those areas. So this is the context that we look into the trends of 2000 in the last 2 decades of our city and see how home values have changed, the increase in certain home values, specifically outside of that string of Poplar Corridor, as we call it, right across going east. Areas both to the north and south throughout the larger expanded city boundary now saw significant decreases in home value leading up to and following the Great Recession. And then the biggest thing that we'll dig into later in this report, but we want to set up here in the trends, is this advent and growth of the investor non-owner occupied properties. So you see there that is mortgage disclosure data, HMDA data, showing how non-owner loans increased the 7 years following the Great Recession. And as we'll see, this increase and shifting from stable working class, predominantly Black neighborhoods that were owner occupied, that were areas where folks could build wealth, we begin to see this outside investor, and Memphis becomes a hub for outside investors. And if we want to see where in our city that occurred the most, we look at the next map and see in the change in ownership that many of those same areas we were discussing earlier that saw the racial and ethnic change. Again, these neighborhoods such as Raleigh, such as Whitehaven, Hickory Hill, Parkway Village, these neighborhoods begin to see the highest growth of investors, and almost 90% of our city's neighborhoods in the last 20 years have seen an increase in rental housing. And that really sets the tone for the housing instability concerns we see in COVID. So from there, we dive deeper and we get into the theme of the report, Rising to Respond to Crisis. And we want to look specifically at drawing a through line from how the housing dynamics in the Great Recession and the years leading up to the Great Recession have then set the tone for what we're seeing in COVID-19. And so to start, we intentionally throughout the report call this a subprime mortgage crisis as opposed to foreclosure crisis. I think the reality is that many traditionally African-American homeowners faced subprime loans, and the city's taken a strong stance on that in the past. And so we see that this same subprime mortgage industry that grew in the 2004 to 2006 time period, where those neighborhoods saw an above average increase in predatory loans or higher cost mortgage loans. These are often either they had an adjustable rate interest where it spiked at the end, or they had fluctuating payments, or they were giving loans to families and individuals, and we're asking them to potentially put down false information in loan applications. All of these predatory schemes, which have since come to light, were really concentrated in those same out of working class, middle class, traditionally stable neighborhoods that we've been discussing. And then also in many pockets of our urban core as well, particularly areas like Orange Mound and South Memphis and the Alcee Ball area as well. So from here, what this does is this subprime loans that we were seeing then immediately begin to turn into foreclosures and vacancies. And you can see in the years leading up to the heart of the Great Recession from 2000 to 2009, vacancy and foreclosures that was already at, in 2000, we were already at 10,000 vacant units as an advent of that disinvestment we mentioned. And then the growth really continues from there. And you see how both of those patterns really have a similar trend in those 10 years leading up to the recession. But as we look in the report how Memphis has rebounded, and we really want to use this to show what our COVID-19 recovery could look like in the city, especially in the housing market, we see that the housing prices that have changed, there's actually in many zip codes, we're seeing home values increase. But I think the warning here in the data shows us that this increase has largely been generated and galvanized by the single family rental market. So this is a housing price change as using the housing price index from the Federal Housing Finance Agency. And many zip codes at the zip code level have seen large increases of 40, 50% in some places. But I think for one, in 2012, the values were very low and were at their lowest. And then also, as rental market and rental investors have come in, housing values have increased. So this is not the housing value increase that we see traditionally with homeownership, but this is really that rental market at play. And then the other big thing is vacancy has stagnated and has remained a problem. We still have a large amount of vacant units. And if we look at how our change in vacancy in Memphis compares to peer cities like Birmingham, Louisville, St. Louis, and the state and the nation as a whole, we see that Memphis has, again, since 2010, has really had that stable trend line. And then if you look to see what that has looked like in our neighborhoods at the neighborhood level, this is very recent USPS, U.S. Postal Service vacancy data. And we see that, again, those concentrated areas in North and South Memphis continue to be a big, constant, stubborn vacancy in those areas. And this is a national trend that we're seeing in many cities like Memphis. But I think it's important for us to know as we have these conversations today and as we move forward in this dialogue that vacancy is a really big issue for us to continue to grapple with. And then the biggest thing, and Deputy Director Albertson mentioned this in the introduction, Memphis is one of the fastest growing rental markets in the country. This clearly leads to more evictions. And especially in light of COVID-19, this is something that the city and many housing partners are focused on. But here you can see this is actually pre-COVID eviction filing numbers. And we already were seeing as many as 32,000, on average, 32,000 eviction filings per year pre-COVID. And that accounts for about 1 in 6 Memphis renters were likely to face an eviction. And the reality of this is, this is a product of us not having enough affordable housing, quality affordable housing. A lot of times you'll hear folks say that Memphis is a lower cost city. It's an affordable city. And the reality is that our affordable housing needs oftentimes are on par or exceed quote unquote hotter market cities such as your Atlantas, your Nashvilles. And Memphis as a whole needs about 60% AMI and less. They need about 38,000 vacant units. And so this is a big problem. And you can see where that happens at the neighborhood level, how we have lost affordable housing units since 2010 and what we can do to address that as a community. And then the biggest thing we wanted to look at is the policies that were used in the subprime crisis. And so we came up with a policy matrix. We really want to set the tone for the type of policies we want to see in light of COVID-19. So this is, we graded certain policies on equity, effectiveness, community engagement, political feasibility. We think these are the core tenets for us to look at in COVID-19. And then briefly in closing, we want to touch on success in action. So again, as was mentioned in the introduction, cities are already aware of this data. They're already using this data to make decisions, and they're already using this to change the game in the housing market in light of COVID-19. And some key tenets we see to proactively addressing COVID-19. For one is this virus is now across all communities has shown us that we need to demand action for these longstanding systemic problems that were there before and continue to be there. And this includes homelessness. So the city is already taking steps to respond to create creative short-term options, but also long-term systems in the homelessness community and in the homelessness ecosystem of service providers to give them additional support. And then using that in the same way to prevent future homelessness through the eviction settlement program and similar actions. So in that, I will close. We'll have plenty of time for questions and conversation throughout the day. But next, I'd like to kick it. We're going to have a short animated video to discuss the housing issues in Memphis. And then I'll kick it to Lauren Lowery from the National League of Cities, who will discuss a conversation around other directors of housing and community development divisions in majority Black cities. Thank you.
The United States is short over 7 million affordable housing units, and that number continues to rise. The Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development says that in order for a house to be considered affordable, it should cost no more than a person or family 30% of their income. HUD breaks down the affordable housing income market into 3 categories: low income, very low income, and extremely low income. And because very low and extremely low income households are large majority renters, we'll be looking at affordable rental units. In the Memphis metropolitan area, a low-income family of 4 at 80% AMI makes about $54,000 a year. That's a little over $1,300 a month. And that family in Memphis can find a place, because for every 100 units needed, there are 103 available to them. However, things become more challenging for families at lower income brackets. A very low-income family of 4 at 50% AMI makes a little under $34,000 a year, which equals to almost $850 per month. For very low-income families, there are only about 57 units available for every 100 needed. And an extremely low-income family of 4 at 30% AMI makes around $26,000 a year and can afford about $655 per month on housing. And for every 100 units needed, there's only about 34 available. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition GAP report, the Memphis metropolitan area is short over 38,000 housing units that are available and affordable to extremely low-income families. That's a lot of homes, and financing them is a significant part of the problem. Regardless of what families are able to pay, the material and labor costs for building or rehabbing housing is the same. The average cost to build or rehab a 1,500 square foot 3-bedroom house or apartment unit in Memphis is about $125 a square foot. Let's assume that's suitable for a family of 4. The property owner would traditionally use debt or equity to finance such a project, both of which would require repayment. A 30-year mortgage at 3.5% interest would require a principal and interest payment of $842 a month. But this amount doesn't include taxes, insurance, maintenance fees, property management fee, or profit for the developer. For the debt principal and interest alone, this housing is not affordable to any families at or below 50% AMI. See a gap? To increase the availability of affordable housing, this gap must be filled. Or families will have to live in cars, double up, or accept substandard or undersized housing. In order to fill the gap, families must either make more money or get a break from owners on what they pay. Since 2008, the average wage in Memphis has stagnated, while overall building supplies have gone up. Subsidies to both renters and developers is one approach to address the problem that has already been implemented at the federal level. For developers, a development subsidy can be available to cover certain costs of construction or rehabilitation, allowing for a reduction in rent or sales price for the family in need of affordable housing. For renters, an operational subsidy can be available to make up the gap between the cost of the unit and the amount that family can pay. Without reducing housing construction costs or an increase in wages, the U.S. needs more creative programs at the federal and local level for low and extremely low income renters, which in turn will significantly help create more affordable housing.
Hello, my name is Paul Young. I'm the Director of Housing and Community Development, and this session is going to be led by Lauren Lowery from National League of Cities. But before she comes forth, I'd like to introduce the Mayor of the City of Memphis, Mayor Jim Strickland.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone, for being with us this morning. As noted in the video that we just saw, quality, affordable housing is an issue that impacts communities all across this great nation, especially here in Memphis. In my opinion, access to safe, quality, affordable housing is a basic need that must be addressed to ensure the maximum quality of life for residents in this great city. As with other issues in this country, access to quality, affordable housing is an issue that disproportionately impacts people of color. As mayor of a city with an African American population of about 65%, it is not only a moral mandate that we want to address quality, affordable housing, but it is core to the economic future and vitality of our city. Quality, affordable housing provides stability for families and allows for improved educational outcomes for students, safer communities, and an increased ability to grow household income. This morning, you're going to hear from city housing directors from 3 majority Black cities that are all working to strengthen affordable housing in their respective cities. We will learn a lot from these leaders as they exchange ideas on how we all can work toward quality, affordable housing for all. To moderate this session, we are very fortunate to have with us the National League of Cities' very own Lauren Lowery, who serves as Program Director for Housing and Community Development at the National League of Cities. All yours, Lauren.
Thank you, Mayor Strickland. Excited to be here today. National League of Cities is the voice of America's cities, towns, and villages, representing more than 200 million people across the country. I'm joined here today by Donald Rancher, Director of Housing and Revitalization with the City of Detroit, Tyra Johnson Brown, the Director of Housing, City of New Orleans, and Memphis' very own Paul Young, Director of the Division of Housing and Community Development. Today, we're going to be discussing a variety of topics that are very timely, and I'm excited to just dive right into the conversation. I thought the video provided a perfect segue, as well as Mayor Strickland's words about safe, quality, and affordable housing. And just to provide context, the National Low Income Housing Coalition recent report, The Gap, stated no state has an adequate supply of affordable and available homes for extremely low income renters. And the shortage of available affordable homes ranges from 8,200 in Wyoming to nearly 1 million in California. So my first question for this roundtable is, how's your city actively trying to produce a more affordable housing and preserve the current stock of affordable housing, as well as implement measures that prevent displacement? So let's start with you, Tara, from New Orleans.
Okay, good morning, everyone. For the City of New Orleans, what we are currently doing is we're allocating more money to affordable housing programs. As we have done in the past, we have so far allocated over $30 million for various affordable housing projects to bring more units online. As most of you know, as directors, that does not happen, bringing units online overnight. That's a process because developers can take anywhere from a year, at least a year, to get financing in place. So doing more programs for affordable housing is one thing, and trying to preserve those that we already have. by offering programs to rehab those units that we have.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul, I would be interested to hear what the City of Memphis is doing.
Yeah, so we have a pretty wide-ranging strategy. We work with a number of nonprofit and for-profit developers that are looking to build affordable housing in our neighborhoods and communities. From a city perspective, we try to provide gap funding using some of our federal funds. We recently instituted an affordable housing trust fund, which is something that is really big for the city of Memphis. It's one of the first times that we've had a dedicated revenue stream from local government resources. So it's a really important part of our strategy to try to encourage the types of developments that we want to see in our community. But we know it's an uphill battle. You heard some of the statistics that Austin gave. There are some 30,000 units that are in need in our community. And so we know that it's going to take a wide development is not going to be the only solution to get us there. We're also going to have to figure out how can we grow incomes in our community. And so building stronger collaborations with the social services sector so that we can work with families to improve skills. All of that is a part of the broader housing solution for our community.
Thank you. And Donna?
Hello. Yes, and thank you so much for inviting me here to talk. So we put together a multifamily housing strategy around 2017, and we identified that there were approximately 10,000 units in the city of Detroit that would be running out or ending their regulatory affordable housing period, right? And the first thing we wanted to do is make sure we identify with those units and make sure that we're also connecting with those owners so we can continue to preserve that affordable housing. And we also push to see if we can create at least 2,000 new additional affordable housing units. And so that's the first thing that we did was make sure that we can track and have a goal that we're trying to meet as far as output is concerned. And since that's happened, it's all about leveraging funding as much as possible and getting philanthropic community and the investment community in the same space, so we can all have a strategic vision of how we're going about creating affordable housing opportunities. So similar to what Paul said, we fundraise first for the Affordable Housing Leverage Fund. We call it the Detroit Future Housing Fund. We're raising up to $250 million over 5 years, and to preserve and create new affordable housing. That particular program or funding strategy, we included philanthropic and other investors who are in the city of Detroit who care about affordable housing. We also raise funding for what we call the Strategic Neighborhood Fund, which is creating funding for specific neighborhoods all around the city of Detroit. We don't want to have all investment within our city center. We want to also put investment in our neighborhoods. And also we did an inclusionary housing ordinance. We have a lot of property here in the city of Detroit. So 20% of all land sales go to a housing trust fund, which we also use to help create affordable housing opportunities. And so as far as regulated affordable housing, we're doing a lot to try to find as much funding as we can to continue and create a more affordable housing opportunities. And a lot of connection and collaboration with our state housing authority, MISHDA, to go after 9% tax credits, LIHTC tax credits, and also 4% tax credits. And so we can try to create more opportunities. That's pretty much largely as far as regulated affordable housing, what we're doing. But we're also pushing the community benefits ordinance, right? So if you're a big time company coming into the city, we would like for you to put some money towards helping us create stable environments for our residents here in the city of Detroit. So that could be funding for rehabs or affordable housing opportunities. And we also have, if anybody receives an abatement in the city of Detroit right now, you have to do 20% of your units at 80% AMI or below. And so, I mean, everything that we are doing is we're doing with intentionality to make sure that we're creating an equitable space for our Detroit residents as much as possible. And it's a core belief of our city to make sure people have opportunities. We're doing in an equitable manner. So just to name a couple of things as far as creating and preserving affordable housing in the city.
Yes, it has been really good to hear y'all talk about producing and preserving. I would like to tease out how y'all, what strategies y'all are implementing for so displacement does not occur. Has that been a hot topic around your city?
I know for the city of Detroit I'll just jump into that. I mean, city of Detroit for sure. We want to make sure people don't think there's two Detroits as investment comes in. We want to grow our city for sure, but we don't want people to be displaced. We track all buildings that are in high market areas that haven't received investment in a while to see if they're going to be potentially displacing residents. And as soon as we hear about something like that, immediately we work with those owners to see what we can do to keep people in there. We've done that several times. It's more difficult when a building is not regulated, and so we only can put so much hands on you. But we act immediately to ensure that people are not displaced, and it's something that it's important for us here in the city to pay attention to. But preserving affordability is a part of ensuring that there's displacement is not happening. So that's part of that strategy.
Thank you, Paul or Tyra.
On that, on Donald's last point, preserving affordability, because I think that's an important aspect. In many of our communities, as Austin talked about earlier, we talk about gentrification, and it is happening in a couple of communities in Memphis, but not as many as we're seeing disinvestment and decline. And so I think it's really important in our community right now that we think about how we can make early investments in those neighborhoods and in those communities using some of these tools that we have, like TIFs, like pilots, like some of the grant dollars that come through housing and community development, because when we can make those investments now, it allows us to preserve affordability in those neighborhoods for the future. There are neighborhoods like Uptown in Memphis where that really should be held up as a success story. They started 20 plus years ago, and they formed a TIF, and a number of different agencies worked in that neighborhood, but they were really, really keen on not displacing. So as they were redeveloping large redevelopment sites, they also provide home repair loans for some of the homeowners in the communities and renters. And so it's a pretty large tract of land in the community where we have been able to preserve homes for people so that they didn't have to be displaced during that development. I think that is a model. The other piece regarding displacement is ensuring that you can secure land control, because unless you control the land, whether it's local government or a nonprofit agency with a community-oriented slant, then it's going to be challenging to prevent displacement when rapid investments occur in these communities. And we know that it can happen overnight in many instances.
And for the city of New Orleans, one thing that we do is that development incentives is that affordability period. When it comes to the city and for grant funding and all, is to increase the affordability period, to extend it out beyond 25 years. And sometime if we could go and say for 99 years, it's just to preserve some of those units so that they can remain affordable within that development and in those communities.
Thank you. Now, the topic of safe, quality, and affordable housing, prior to COVID, it was a crisis with housing affordability and with the homeless crisis. And, since March 2020, over 50 million Americans have filed unemployment claims, and upwards of 22 million renter households in the U.S. are at risk of eviction by December 31st of this year. And homelessness has been exacerbated. So as you're making strides with producing as well as preserving and implementing displacement strategies, how has your city progress has been impacted or has been accelerated? I've heard from cities around the country that they've been able to implement both short-term and long-term interventions now because we were looking for creative solutions. And in some cities, some of their plans have been pushed back. I would be interested to hear how your city is grappling with this pandemic.
I can start from
Go ahead.
homeless standpoint. From the homeless standpoint, what we did immediately is went and started moving homeless out of various encampments, especially in areas. We have a large encampment area underneath an overpass in downtown New Orleans. And we went around and we were able to move the homeless, and actually with the help of our COC, our Continuum of Care, Unity of Greater New Orleans, and with the state Louisiana Housing Corporation, bringing those resources together, moving them, and actually putting them in a hotel. We were able to put them in a hotel, provide them with 3 meals a day, and making sure that they have supportive services. We were able to move over 400 homeless people into hotels. And to this day, I am glad to say that out of that 400, over 280 have been placed into permanent housing. And we still are doing some placement. So that's on the homeless side. For as evictions, we did immediately on April 1st. We stood up a rental assistance program. We started off with only $2 million, had over 8,000 residents to immediately respond because, with people being laid off and all. So we was able to start immediately helping families that were behind on their rent, providing them with at least 3 months of rental assistance. And as the funding started depleting, we were able to replenish that fund. In August, we were able to stand up a homeless prevention program to using our COVID CARES Act money. And from that, that was any families that was facing eviction that had eviction notices, we were able to respond to them. So those two programs, we were able to, the rental programs, we were able to stand up pretty quickly. And we just was able to do a small landlord emergency grant program. We just implemented that program, so we'll have to see how it would go. But that is for our little small mom pop landlord owners that have 8 units or less, where they can get grant funding up to $15,000 if they're behind on their mortgage due to the tenants not paying their rent. So they can receive that, or if they're even facing eviction. So we just stood up that. We did receive well over 200 calls. We're actually right now reviewing like 30 applications. So those are some of the things that we have been able to do for that.
That's amazing. Paul?
Yeah, that is amazing. And similar efforts have been underway here in Memphis. I was really amazed at how quickly our community was able to come together in March when the crisis began. We started trying to figure out how can we address what we believed was going to be an eviction crisis. And so we had a number of agencies that came together to stand up the eviction settlement fund. So you had groups like the University of Memphis Law School, Neighborhood Preservation, Inc., Memphis Area Legal Services, Shelby County Government, and a host of other partners, Innovate Memphis. They came together to stand up a new program in 2 months. And any of you that work in government know that that's an unheard of thing, to be able to stand up a completely new program within 2 months and identify all of the funding. And so that's one initiative that I think we've done during this crisis, but I think it's going to last well beyond. And the beautiful thing about it is not just that we're able to pay the settlement for the tenants, it's also that those tenants are able to have legal representation when they go to court. And this is something that is really, really important, because for years we've had a crisis with evictions in our community when you look at the data. And so we use this as an opportunity to stand something up that's going to last well beyond the COVID-19 crisis. We're also using, as New Orleans, we're using some of those COVID funds, CARES Act dollars, to stand up some landlord relief programs. We have one that's getting ready to come out next month in partnership with United Housing, where renters will be able to get some relief, but it'll also provide some relief from landlords, because we do understand that they are in business. And so we think it's a dual benefit. The landlords need revenue and the tenants need a place to stay. And so we want to continue to strive for programs that have that dual benefit, but we ultimately want to help people be able to have stable places to live.
Excellent. Ron?
So, very similar type of programs in Detroit. I'm glad to hear that my some of those my partner cities and people who are in this space really care about, especially our homeless community. City of Detroit, similar to what the other programs that were mentioned. The first thing that we did in March was stand up 4 different shelter spaces. 3 of those shelter spaces actually took homeless individuals. Basically, from the reduction of our homeless shelters, we actually would reduce the population of how many homeless individuals could be in each shelter, and stood up 3 additional homeless shelters as overflow shelter space that accompanied with food and medical assistance, and also did temperature checks 3 times a week at every shelter. And I think we did over 20,000 temperature checks. If any individual was identified as being sick or having symptoms, we would take those individuals out of that shelter, and we had an actual COVID homeless shelter space where we would take those people and separate between people who are COVID positive and people who are symptomatic. And so work to do that right away. Also with ESG, emergency shelter grant money, we're continuing to do that work, trying to figure out how we can get how we can improve our shelter space, because one of the things that we want to do is end congregate care and improve the quality of actual environment quality for our homeless population. Right now, we're really trying to push rapid rehousing and get people out of homeless shelter to get them into quality housing and a more permanent space to stay. We also have an EDP program with the state of Michigan. They provided around approximately $7 million to the city of Detroit, and our department put up another $6 million to help people with eviction assistance, not only to pay rental arrears, but also forward, because it was like, okay, people are going to be right back here again if we don't really act accordingly. But we also represent people in court with their landlords as well. It's all about creating as much stability as possible. But I got to tell you that I'm definitely going to be very watchful of Congress and what's happening on the federal level, because I don't think, I think definitely coming January, we're going to be hitting this issue again, and we're going to probably have to re-up and do the same things again. The same type of funding are going to be needed to help our help our people in rental housing, and also help our homeless population. So we're watching it very closely, very similar programs. It's funny because we could have just kind of traded the same information to do the same. It's great. Hearing what you guys are doing is fantastic, but we're also doing something very similar here in the city of Detroit.
Yeah, just amazing work. My question, I know, Paul, you hit on it about institutionalizing some of these interventions. Do you see with the tools that have been implemented to preserve affordable housing or preserve housing instability during this time, do y'all see making them permanent fixtures in your housing portfolio programs?
I do. I think that, just speaking back to the issue of homelessness, in the city of Memphis, we annually receive about $500,000 a year in what Donna referred to emergency solutions grant, which is not a ton of money to support individuals that are experiencing homelessness. As a result of the CARES Act, we received about $6 million in ESG funds. So that allows us to really innovate around how we address homelessness. And so we're working with a host of agencies, service providers to think through how can we use these dollars, not just as a temporary fix, but to boost up our whole industry around homelessness. And so I think that those types of innovations are happening because there's actually dollars available. And so I think that we will certainly come out on the back end of this crisis stronger than we were before it.
And I'm really glad you emphasize partnerships and how, it's just not the city alone, and that the community is rallying together to ensure a safety net.
Absolutely. I mean, it can't be done without partnerships.
Yeah, that's key.
Very good. This crisis has shown a lot. I wouldn't really say shown a lot, but exacerbated. One topic that I'm thinking about every day as I lay out recommendations to cities across the United States is, racial equity. And long before COVID, there were inequities in our housing system. Black codes, redlining, racial covenant, racial segregation, urban renewal, and predatory lending has impacted cities throughout the United States. The results of that is that homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by $48,000 per home. Black, Native American, and Latinx households are more likely to be extremely low income. Low-income women of color, particularly Black women, are cost burdened and face a higher rate of eviction. And Black people, they make up 13% of the general population, but represent more than 40% of the homeless population. And so as a director in a majority Black city, how's your department and city grappling with this issue? More specifically, how's your city embedding racial equity, operationalizing it, and advancing it with the policies and programs you're implementing to create safe, quality, and affordable housing? And I know I hit y'all with a lot, but I'm very interested in seeing what each of your cities is doing in this space.
So, I mean, I always, it's funny because I'm very uncomfortable with silence. So I just jump in. So anyways, so the mayor of the city of Detroit, Mayor Duggan, he actually put together what we call an equity council last year, and across departments over several subject areas. He asked us to make sure that we focus on creating equity amongst any housing, health, workforce, entrepreneurship, land control. So we actually have an equity council. I lead, of course, the housing portion of that. And out of that, it's like coming up with ideas on how to increase and improve equity in the city of Detroit. I always considered my job as doing that anyway, and so it was great that we're paying attention to it, and we're actually coming out with initiatives to focus on equity. So I know for us, for the housing portion, I really, so one of the ideas we're having is housing resource centers. This is, a place for Detroiters to actually go to get housing assistance of any type of any need that they need or that they desire. So if you're a homeowner, how do you receive information on how to reduce your taxes to nothing? How do we get rid of all of your the taxes you essentially owe on your back taxes that you owe on your house, right? To create that stability. How do we create more homeowners, which I think is one of the biggest things you can do to, stop gentrification is and also wealth disparity gaps is to make sure we have an opportunity to give people the ability to own their home, right? If you can pay $850 a month, which is 60% AMI in the city of Detroit, you can pay a mortgage for a $70,000 home every month. So how do I get that individual into a house and to own their own home? And so we're looking at down payment assistance, which is usually the biggest barrier to actually close on a house. To purchase a home and get a mortgage is like that upfront cost to get it. And again, we started an entity called the Preservation Partnership, which we can identify housing in the city before they're maybe displacing people and changing their regulatory affordable housing rules on housing. And we're also trying to do something big too, is trying to get a website together and correlate data across all types of subsidies that provide housing, whether it's in the state or HUD or the city. How can I put somebody in a housing unit or the public housing, right? How do I put in somebody in a housing unit that needs it quickly, right? The same person who's on a wait list to get a voucher is the same person who's on a wait list to get an affordable housing unit somewhere else. And there's really no coordinated system of how to get people placed. And so that's another idea that we're really looking at, but just really helping people get the resources that they need to get quality housing space is an area that we're trying to do. But I really want to create homeowners, especially in a city right now that's taking a lot of investment from outside investors, and big companies are coming to the city. I want to make sure as a city is being invested in, they have an opportunity to also share in that investment.
Thank you. Tyra, what are y'all doing in New Orleans as it relates to racial equity?
And it's funny that he just said that, because we also have an equity committee that Mayor Cantrell that stood up and dealt with the various different segments. And prior to COVID, we actually, with the leadership of our mayor, did what was a housing tour. And it was led by our neighborhood engagement department. And so what would happen on these housing tours, we would go in the various different districts of New Orleans and host these housing tours and provide resources. And it was along with various nonprofits and the developers and all, and to talk about the various housing programs and what's going on in the various neighborhoods, but also to have those different resources available right then and there. So when community had questions, that they could speak to the people right then and there. And if they needed to go in and see, the various departments or whatever, they could make appointments and talk about the various programs and get assistance. So we're doing some of the same things. Also, from those housing tours, it actually, some of our programs, it actually increased some of the programs, because the people are now able to know about them. You hear about the different programs and you talk about them, but then we found that a lot of people in the community did not know exactly what was out there. It wasn't until we actually went into the community to let them know, this is what's really going on in the city right here in your community. So we're kind of doing some of the same things.
Thank you.
Yeah, so many of the same type of programs, but when it comes to racial equity, I think one of the most equitable approaches that we're looking at from a development perspective is the Memphis 3.0 comprehensive plan that was recently created in the city of Memphis. And the reason that we frame that as an equitable approach is because for many years, our city did not grow in an equitable manner. In 1981, we had a comprehensive plan for our city, and what that plan said is that we want to be larger. We want to be a bigger city, and we achieved that goal. We grew by, 100 plus square miles. But what we didn't count on was the fact that the people that were going to live in this expanded area were the same people that occupied the smaller area. So all we did was grow our geographic footprint, and the people that had the least means and the least opportunities were left in those communities, and those communities began to see greater and greater disinvestment. And so with this comprehensive plan for Memphis 3.0, our strategy is to figure out how can we direct investment into the communities that really need it. And we use the simple premise that if you look at a city, the downtown is essentially the core of that city. It's the living room of that city. It's the billboard for that city. Well, neighborhoods have that same premise. If you go into a neighborhood, there's an intersection, there's a node, there's a place in that community that essentially is the heartbeat of that neighborhood. It's the thing that people think about when they think about that community. And so what we tried to do with Memphis 3.0 is identify those, what we frame as anchors. We identified those anchors all throughout this community and in this city. And our goal is to drive investment into the anchors and let that be the light that shines in each neighborhood, so that we can drive investment into the communities that haven't seen it in many years. And I think that is a really important strategy. And building upon that strategy, we've done things like elevate our investment in down payment assistance in targeted neighborhoods that aren't seeing significant home ownership. We've done things like strategic acquisitions of property. I mentioned earlier that land control is one of the most important things when we start talking about redeveloping neighborhoods and communities. The city can be a very big partner in helping to acquire those strategic sites in those anchors, so that those communities can see the types of development that they would like to see and drive some of the participation goals that are necessary to boost up the economy for our minority populations. And so those are things that our city is thinking about on a daily basis. There are many other approaches, but I just wanted to drill into some of the development related approaches to equity.
And so that brings me to the question of, I've worked in a city prior to coming to National League of Cities. And my favorite part of working in a city has been building with the community and building a collective vision in helping them to develop the types of community they would like to see. As you're thinking about each of you, producing and preserving safe and quality affordable housing, how is the community a part of this, not only engaging but having a leadership role in the development of bringing more housing online?
I think you certainly have to bring that community voice into all of the conversations around housing. But from a government perspective, it's important to realize that community can mean different things. In some neighborhoods, they push back on affordable housing. And so local government has to hear from the broader community and think about what are the goals for us as a city, and how does this affordable housing development connect to the broader vision to providing affordable housing for all. How can we have those dialogues with the communities that may not necessarily want an affordable development in their neighborhood? Because it definitely happens. And we have to be able to, the city has to take a position. And that's where we often, you get a little bit of rub when you start having those conversations. Everybody likes affordable housing in principle. But when it's next door to you, do you still feel the same? And so those are the types of things that as a city, we have to continue to drive. while still listening to that community voice, because across the broader community, we have a goal, and we have heard from the community that this is something that we want to see happen. And then when you start getting to the specifics, that's where you sometimes get a little bit of pushback, and that's where government, I feel, has to step up.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I couldn't have said it more perfectly, Paul. I mean, so I can tell you that whether it's a zoning change or a tax abatement or a land sale or even investment of funds, city funds into a project, which is essentially covers pretty much 90% of the projects in the city of Detroit have to fall into one of those things. You have to do community engagement because it takes a city council action to approve any of those pieces. And so there's pretty much a lengthy community engagement process. And if your project is over $75 million, there's a community benefits ordinance where you actually have to involve like a community board that comes together that says, like, these are the kind of investments we want to see this development project bring to the city. And so community engagement is strong, definitely, but I couldn't agree more, right? So, when we have principles here that all people can live in your neighborhood. So at the end of the day, we're trying to create affordability across an income spectrum. When there are neighborhoods where, you get the community voice and they say, listen, I don't want affordable housing in my neighborhood. At the end of the day, I tell them that I don't have the luxury not to allow people who are of lower income not to be in your neighborhood. So you do have to have principles. You have to listen to the concerns of the community and address some of those things where if you have issues about security, okay, developer, what can we do to do more street lights? What can we do for roving security? Whatever we can do to make people more comfortable in their neighborhood. But you also have to be founded in actual principles when you go out to the community. And I say that all the time because when I go into some communities, they're like, we want deeper affordability, and you don't listen to us. And I always tell them that, at the same time I listen to you all, there's principles that I have that's founded that says, listen, we are creating housing opportunities for all people. I know you want to have very, very low incomes in this space, but we need to have housing for people who are nurses and teachers, right? And police officers and firefighters, right? That middle income space sometimes can be missed when you're investing a lot in the neighborhood. And at the same thing I'm telling you that we're founding these principles on is the same thing I'm telling the community that doesn't want affordability in their neighborhood, right? I'm telling you the same thing. These are our principles, so let's work from there. But community is a strong part of everything we do. And to even if I didn't want to listen to the community, which I do, you wouldn't be able to pass it without getting community buy-in. That's the first question that our city council is going to ask about is what do the community say about this project? So
Great. That's really great. Tara?
Yeah, I same sentiment for what they've said. You have to have community buy-in because you're going to have pushback. We find that in New Orleans, a lot of times when it's development, we have pushback because in certain neighborhoods, they'll tell us that, look, we don't want no more rental units. We don't want any more apartments. We want homeowners, so you do. And it starts with getting the community more engaged. That's where our neighborhood engagement department comes in. That's where you start having more of those community meetings, and you have to listen to them. You have to consider some things, but as government, we do have to, take that hard look and that stand, and make those tough decisions. So, yes.
Thank you. As we talk about community, I think one of the things I would like one of my last questions I would like to ask is around city budgets, in managing expectations, without additional CARES dollars, cities across the country are projected about a $360 billion revenue loss, and cities are beginning to make cuts. And so what does that mean for each of y'all as y'all work to provide a safe, quality, and affordable housing?
It means a lot for us. Obviously, I even saw a comment in the chat where they referenced the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Over the past budget season, our trust fund that we were so happy to stand up, we couldn't fund it this year because we had an $80 million projected deficit in our budget. Now we were able to do that this year because the agencies that we awarded from last year's allocation had just been awarded, so they're just getting to work. But it's an example of how this crisis can really impact what we're trying to achieve on the affordable housing front. And so I think it's important that we do a couple of things from a city perspective. One, try to identify as many revenue streams as possible, sustainable revenue streams, with the understanding that as we get more housing units online, as we occupy more of these vacant spaces in our neighborhoods, that's more tax dollars that'll be able to help the budget in future years. And so it's important to be able to make that investment now. That's how we were able to stand up the down payment assistance program. We used the simple premise that if we can allow people to purchase houses in these neighborhoods now, then that's property tax revenue that we'll be able to generate later. The same thing applies for new developments in our neighborhoods and in our communities. And so from a city budget perspective, we just need to continue to try to figure out how many revenue streams we can build, because the more units we bring online, the more tax revenue we're ultimately able to bring. And I also want to touch on another point that Donald mentioned when he talked about the balance between affordable housing and middle income housing. In our neighborhoods and communities, we often lead with affordable housing, but I think it's often left out how important it is to also have middle income families as well occupying our neighborhoods in the same space. I think about neighborhoods like South Memphis, where back in the 50s and 60s, when my mom and dad grew up in that area, there were doctors living next door to the janitors, next door to the teachers, next door to the lawyers. Everybody was in the same space in those neighborhoods and those thriving Black communities. And we got to figure out how we bring that back, because it helps strengthen the local economy. And it also helps to bring more social capital to the families living in those neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm next, but definitely everything that was said thus far. But I'm every day we're thinking about how to approach things differently, accessing more funding for affordable housing. Recently, I was speaking to a developer who wanted to do an all market rate development project, and believed that his project couldn't pencil if he put any affordable housing units in there. And I said, listen, how about you fund the development or rehab of some other housing units in the neighborhood that would be affordable, right? And so he invested into that to make it happen, right? So how can we, because there's definitely just not enough funding. At the end of the day, in the city of Detroit, we're at $300,000 a unit. We have a lack of skilled labor in the city of Detroit, and it's causing the increase of just unit production and construction costs. And so when you're making these deals with some of these developers, how can you use some of the funding that they have to help you deal with and cover some of the gaps that you have in other projects that you're trying to get done? So we think outside the box. I know one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that, especially in the city of Detroit, when we're trying to think of affordability, I think a lot of times people think of regulated affordable housing, that you have some, federal regulation where you're using CDBG or home funds to get your project done. But a lot of our affordable housing is just by private lender or private landowners living in neighborhoods How do I help those landlords and those homeowners to be in a space where it's more economically beneficial for them to keep those units affordable and those units quality? Can I get them a tax break? Can I get them, as I think somebody mentioned before, that they had a landlord rehab program for some of the smaller landlords? I mean, because to be honest, they're in the city of Detroit. They're the ones who are providing probably the most affordable housing units in the city. It's not just all regulated, right? And I think people always think the regulated housing comes from federal dollars, and it doesn't. It's not always from public housing. It's from Joe Blow, who lives in the neighborhood, who's renting out his house for $750, but he's struggling to get the house rehabbed or the roof repaired. He has high taxes just like everybody else. How do I help him so he can continue to keep the unit affordable for the family who's living there? So just a lot of ideas that think outside the box to create that affordability for people. And that's what we're trying to do every day.
And so for the city of New Orleans, it is thinking outside of the box and how can you be more creative and innovative. When the pandemic happened, we had just as Paul said, we had just awarded 10 projects for affordable housing. It was over 10 million, was like $10.8 million. And so at that time, we was trying to figure out, like, do we continue on with these projects? What should we do? And I will tell you, the state, Louisiana Housing Corporation, actually stepped in, and they had some CDBG disaster dollars, piggyback dollars that they were able to allocate to the city of New Orleans for those projects. They looked at the projects and they saw they was viable projects and wanted to keep them going. That allowed us to free up those dollars that we had to be able to continue on, with operations and all. Because when we do our funding, a lot of times our funding is HUD funding. It's going to be the CDBG. It's going to be the home dollars. The only other funding source that we really have is a millage, which is a neighborhood housing improvement fund. We call it NIF funds. And that millage is actually getting ready to expire. So we have to look at what other funding streams that we can have to be able to sustain and continue on, which comes back to what do we need to do as cities to make sure that we have enough resources. We got to advocate more, go to legislative, because it's not enough. We need more money. There is not enough resources and to do what we need to do to be able to sustain these families and have the units that we need.
Thank you. I think we'll get into our Q&A portion at this time. So we have a question for Mr. Rancher. Talk more about their preservation approach to affordable housing, NOAA's naturally occurring affordable housing. Is it supporting repairs for healthy housing?
Yeah, so that's a pretty loaded question. It's a lot. I could talk about that for a minute. So if you could leave the question on there, it would be great. So again, I remember the first time when we did our research and to find out, exactly when the regulations would be falling off on many of our affordable housing units over the next 5 years. We did that kind of data research, and we found out that 10,000 units could be running out of their affordability. And so right away, we knew that we didn't have enough gap funds to cover all those things. To ensure that all those units would be continue to stay affordable. So we essentially through an RFP got a preservation. We established a preservation partnership, which is a contingent of a group of lenders and other housing partners on the state and federal and local level, which identifies preservation opportunities for every single unit that's out there. And we try to ensure that we don't lose a unit ever, right? However, the NOAA projects, naturally occurring affordable housing. These are the ones that are unregulated or non-regulated, and those ones are tougher, right? The owners are not, and the buyers, the sellers and the buyers are usually not used to regulated housing funding, and so we try to interject as quickly as possible. Kind of unfortunately and fortunately, in the city of Detroit, it's really, really difficult to develop a building without an abatement. And as I said before, an abatement usually takes some action of city council. And so city council here in Detroit, thankfully, are not really too excited to give a developer an abatement if they're kicking people out of their house or their unit. And so we work with the developers through that are NOAA projects to try to see if we can provide some funding opportunity where they can financially keep the people who are at lower incomes in the building and continue to sustain the building for some length of time. And so we've done that through the Affordable Housing Leverage Fund and trying to find different ways and thinking outside the box so we can help those developers make it financially feasible to keep those people in those units.
I think we have a next question. Thank you for that. Does Memphis have something as extensive as this specifically for landlords facing financial crisis?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we have for landlords too that I would point to. One is for landlords that have tenants that are currently facing eviction, meaning they have evictions that have been filed in court. There's the eviction settlement fund that I referenced earlier that those landlords can point those tenants to, and it'll provide a settlement, but that settlement would also allow that tenant to stay in place and the landlords to receive some funding. Another program that will be opening up in the next week or two is one that we have with United Housing, where we'll be providing rent and mortgage assistance. And although it's targeted directly to tenants, the benefit obviously goes to the landlord when those tenants are able to make payments. And so those are two programs that I know of right now. And we're also having conversations about whether we can structure any business relief programs with some of these COVID funds that are specifically targeting landlords as the business. Now, with that, obviously, we would still want to have that caveat that if we provide that business relief to the landlord, that the tenant is the beneficiary of that relief, in addition to the landlord getting those payments. That program is yet to be set up. However, it is one that we're certainly considering.
Thank you for that. The next question that has come in, what are your cities doing to keep seniors and low-income residents in their home and to renovate those homes as part of affordable housing initiatives?
I can answer that. For the city of New Orleans, we have an owner-occupied rehab program. We did suspend that program due to COVID, where we would go in and as far as seniors and household with disabled, have a household that has a disability. And what we do is if they need health and safety or just minor rehab, to go in and do an assessment with our code enforcement, our inspectors from within our OCD unit and do an assessment of the home and determine what repairs is needed, and then go in and actually we will do those repairs. We are getting ready to start that process back up. We did started before COVID, where we had over 3,000 applications. So we're getting ready to start on the first 300. And that is for the priority is seniors.
Thank you.
And I know in the city of Detroit, similar programs, we have a 0% interest program. We also have a senior emergency rehab program. And we have a lead abatement program as well. Right now with our housing resource centers that we're working on right now, we're also trying to see how we can coordinate the other other aspects of resources for individuals to see if that also helps them. So the line, I'm not sure for you all, but I know our line for people who need rehab, especially now in COVID when you're not particularly safe inside your home or outside your home, it's more important than ever. And many people believe that they can't afford to do rehabs in their house as they're waiting in line for their rehab. So I know some people in some cities actually do lotteries for these type of grant assistance. But so what we do is like, all right, what other things can we do in your house, right? Can we lower your utility costs because we have RAP services that lowers water rates for you? Can we reduce the amount of taxes that you pay on a yearly basis? And if we eliminate some of those costs for your housing stability, does that allow you to get maybe a 0% interest loan, which has a much shorter line, of course, for that particular program? So we do all of those things. There are many seniors who actually watch their grandkids on a daily basis, so they're actually able to receive some of the lead abatement and rehab services as well. And so it's all about coordinating those programs, but we definitely do have those programs too in the city of Detroit.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just briefly jump in on that one, because that's one of the issues that has probably been the most frustrating and heartbreaking since I've been in this role since 2016. I mean, at least once a week we get a call or email from the mayor's office or directly to our office from a resident that has significant needs for repairs. And while we have great partnerships, we have partnerships with groups like Green and Healthy Homes and Memphis Light, Gas and Water, Tennessee Valley Authority. A number of agencies are all working together to try to strengthen the pipeline to support those home repairs. We have a great program through Habitat for Humanity. We partner with them to support renovations for seniors. But every one of those programs are significantly oversubscribed. And so we are actively looking at ways to replicate some of the programs that Donald talked about, some things that they're doing in Detroit around home repairs. We're looking to do some things like that because we know it's an issue that has to be addressed. So we're hoping in the coming months we have some even more resources to help people make the changes that they need. We also have weatherization program where we go in and make energy improvements to reduce utility costs. We do have a lead abatement program. Thanks to HUD, we've secured a couple of grants. The city has a $5 million grant, and then the county just a couple of weeks ago received another $5 million grant. So we're excited about the resources that we have, but we also have, this double problem of trying to ensure that we have a sufficient number of contractors with the skills to be able to go in and make the renovations, and finding ways to reduce liability to the city when those repairs are made. So home repair is a really complicated issue, but it's one that we are certainly committed to working to address.
Thank you. The next question I have for y'all, how do you get around the barriers of homes not qualifying for rehab because of past due mortgages or property tax? And I know this is a sticky subject. I know when I worked in the city, this was a hard thing to get around.
So one of the things that we do, we allow individuals that have worked out at least an agreement with our trustee's office to be able to still enroll in the program. And so that's the best way that we've been able to get around it. So they may not have to have caught up all the way on whatever they owe. However, as long as they're enrolled in the program with the trustee's office, we do allow them to participate in those rehab programs.
I would say it's the same with the city of Detroit. Other than our 0% interest loan, I mean, people are getting underwritten, so they would take into consideration a mortgage on the house, but it doesn't have anything to do with our grant programs where it's just a grant and you're not repaying. If you need a rehab, you need a rehab. But I think it's also interesting, like I said, right? The city of Detroit has been fortunate enough to have some big companies come into the city who want to put their headquarters and and bring their companies here to the city. And what they've promised to people in the neighborhood is to put money into housing repair grant programs. And so we've been using that. I always say, if you're investing in any developer or company or business is investing in the neighborhood to bring their home or their investment into the neighborhood, what's the point if you're going to be right next to a house that's falling apart, right? And so I also see developers and other investors who are putting projects together in neighborhoods or are interested in helping out in our rehab programs. And so we don't taxes too is it's not going to be an issue as long as you can put yourself into a repayment program and you have proof of that, and we'll keep it going. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Same for you.
Well, for the city of New Orleans, unfortunately, if it's the property taxes, you wouldn't qualify for the program, but that's one thing that we have been in conversations about. If a homeowner is, have made a payment plan, and is that something that we would consider? But we do have something that's in as a city code that if you owe on property tax, then you wouldn't qualify for those programs.
Thank you. We have one more question or so. Are the technology covenants being considered? As we found during this pandemic, many people in low income housing were without access to the bandwidth for class and work.
Well,
I don't know if we have technology covenants, but we are working to try to identify some programs to help low-income families with access to the internet. And so we're looking at some creative uses. We're currently working with a couple of partners throughout the community to provide direct access through subscription services. And we're also looking at ways that city fiber can be used to help support public Wi-Fi access in different locations throughout the city. Some of those are pretty early conversations, and obviously we have to collaborate with some of the telecom providers to ensure that they have opportunities to provide those services as well. But that is something that I think COVID-19 really made clear, was that we need to have a solution to ensure that everybody is able to access the internet, because right now it's an essential utility. Just like sewer and water, people need access to technology if you're going to be able to survive in this 21st century.
I know that we've been discussing whether we should put internet connection into our regulatory agreements, but we actually have a department who is pushing for connectability around the city of Detroit, working with our public housing agency and all of our affordable housing developers. And as soon as I think we're at a point where we can readily get that access, so it would be definitely something I'm very interested in ensuring that's in all of our housing units going forward. So I agree that it's going to be it's going to be just as important as water and gas and electricity to your house. You got to have some type of connection, especially in this environment. It's shined a real light on it.
And for the city of New Orleans, that covenant did come into play, but for low income housing, but it was more around with the school kids, making sure that they had access to internet because of virtual learning.
Great. And I know we are in the process of wrapping up our session. Do y'all have any closing words or any thoughts that you feel that our audience should know as we begin to look towards the future of producing and preserving safe and quality affordable housing, but as we get through this pandemic?
So I'll start. I would say that addressing these housing issues is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Oftentimes in government, we want to try to find a quick fix, but unfortunately, it's not. And it's not just government. Everybody kind of they want a quick fix. They want to get these things done. But the issues that we're dealing with are the result of hundreds of years of discrimination and challenges. And so whatever solutions we put in place, we have to give them time to play out. We have to chip away at this problem one by one. And so I think that all of the cities that I've heard today are working to do that. I know many other cities are. And at the end of the day, I just like to keep people at the core. At the end of the day, it's about that family who's going to have an opportunity to be stabilized, to have a place that they can call home, to improve educational outcomes, to improve outcomes for work. All of those things go back to having a stable place to call home. And so thank you all for having this discussion with us today.
Yeah, and I would just like to say on behalf of the City of New Orleans, we really appreciate you all allowing us to be here. As you know, we're dealing with Hurricane Zeta right now. So we have another added disaster that we're really dealing with. But when it comes to housing, just as Paul said, everybody thinks that, housing is something, development is something that just happens overnight. It does not. It takes years and it takes resources. A lot of time you can plan and they think that the resources and the allocations are going to be the same. It's not. It's fluid. So you could plan for tomorrow and something can happen, in a matter of seconds. And so our overall goal is for people to have safe, decent, and affordable housing. So thank you all.
Right. And I would just like to say that, where you live is usually the strongest indicator of your socioeconomic outcome, right? And I think it's important to understand that even though we're building housing doesn't, it doesn't get you to a place of prosperity, right? You have to have those holistic approaches, and investment into quality neighborhoods. It takes more than just housing, right? It takes, like, I have a lot of these housing conversations about, what are you guys trying to, what are you doing to increase the more affordability? But I think it's important to know that you have to have an entire ecosystem. You got to invest in healthy parks, neighborhoods, commercial corridors to make it all happen, to make sure that it's a healthy and quality place for families to live in. And so I just would, put that out there. Housing is not the only component. It takes a real push in leadership to make sure we're building neighborhoods in an equitable fashion. So I'm glad to hear some other optimists in my ecosystem that work hard every day to make it happen. So thank you for letting me be here.
And thank you, everyone. And thank you for the City of Memphis for this partnership on this roundtable. I just echo all my colleagues here. Housing is definitely a journey, and we are definitely putting in the work to see every city having safe, quality, and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I want to thank the City of New Orleans, the City of Detroit, the National League of Cities for partnering with us for that session. This will conclude the first session of today's summit. However, we will have breakout sessions. So for those of you that are viewing this through YouTube and Facebook, please go to hopin.com, HOPIN.com. Search for State of Memphis Housing Summit, and you can register to participate in the breakout sessions. We will be back streaming live on this stage on YouTube and Facebook at 11:45. We will break until the next breakout sessions begin at 10:45. So thank you all for participating, and see you soon.